Hello, everybody. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. I'm PJ Trudeau. Thank you so much for joining us today for the future of work, how leaders need to pivot in today's workplace. Amy Riccardi, our Chief People Officer and the founder, is going to really be able to give us some great insight into things that we can do to really pivot in this environment that really seems to be ever changing, as all of us know. So we're certainly glad that you were able to join us. We are recording the session. I will make sure that I send a summary out that will include the slides, and it will also include a recording of the session for those that want to go back and watch it again, and those that unfortunately may not have been able to join us today. But certainly do feel free, as you have questions or comments, to pop those in the Zoom chat. But let me go ahead now and turn it over to Amy.
Hi, PJ. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday to everybody. I can't believe we're already here. I felt like Monday should have been Friday, I think also. It's been kind of a crazy week. So I'm glad you guys are here. We're going to be taking about 90 minutes to go through this topic. It's going to be kind of a fast and furious 90 minutes. We're going to do some polling. We're going to have some breakout groups. We're going to go through some data. We're going to have some conversation around the future of work. And before we begin, I want to just tell you kind of a little bit about what the session's not going to be. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about kind of return to office and kind of the here and now stuff, although I am going to talk to you a little bit about what the symptoms are about what's happening right now and what I see kind of long term. But I do want us to spend some time talking about what's going to be happening in the future and what we see happening coming out in the next couple of years. So as we move forward here in this presentation, I want to tell you that we're going to do some introductions here really quickly. I want to talk about kind of these three key reasons why employees are quitting. I actually have 5 that I'll share with you, but definitely the first 3. We're going to talk about the future of work data. I'm going to share with you some 8 steps about pivoting leadership right now and what needs to happen. We're going to talk about, and I'm going to give you some consulting guidance on what I'm telling clients right now with regards to 2 key areas of human capital and where I'm having clients really focus on right now. And I'm going to share with you some wrap-up items and some opportunities that you all have available to you coming up here if you're interested in partaking in it. So as we get started here, we have this first polling question, and I'd love for you guys to dive in. And the question really is, what role do you play in providing training, performance, feedback, coaching, development, and guidance to your senior most leaders in your organization? So I'd love to kind of know what role you all play in that. So we'll pop that poll question up here, and you can pick the one that most aligns with what you've got going on. There's lots of choices here, I know, but pick the one that most aligns with what you do. This is going to be really important as we move forward here, because I think training and retooling leadership in the future is going to be probably one of the key aspects of things in the future of work. So let's see how these roll out. I know I've got a number of people also kind of coming in too. So if you're just joining us, we're just popping in the first poll here. So if you can quickly take a peek at this one and see where you're at, that would be great. This is good. I like being able to see this live, PJ. It's always interesting to watch these numbers shift. So yeah, and if you have some other arrangement, feel free to drop that in the chat too, because it'd be really interesting to kind of understand a little bit more about what other things are kind of going on out there. I've been out of the I started off my career in the e-learning and education and training space. So I haven't been as involved directly in that necessarily. So it'd be great to kind of get a sense of what other people are seeing out there in that world too, and what other people are doing with that. So it looks like most of you guys are solely responsible for this, but then we've got people that are managing it locally at the team level. Some of you influence the direction, but don't actually do it. This is really helpful. Okay. Good. Okay, I think we can. Oh, you guys aren't seeing these. You guys aren't seeing these results yet, are you?
Yep. No, I shared them with everybody.
Okay.
And then just stop sharing that.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, this is good. So I have responsibility. Lisa says she's responsibility for performance management coaching. However, it sits in another department that you collaborate with. Okay, great. Okay, good. So I actually think that, like I said, I think this is going to become one of the key issues in the human capital space here in the next 6 to 12 months, if it isn't already for a lot of people. And I'm going to explain to you why that is here in a few minutes. But let me jump back into this and take a step back here really quickly. So I want to just tell you a little bit about myself and how I even got into this space. And I've had some people here in the roundtable, because I'm a member of the roundtable here, ask me kind of, what do you do? Because sometimes people have said, I hear you talking about being kind of a practitioner and then sometimes more consultant. And it's true, I kind of do both. So I have this company called Leadership Evolution Group. We're an outsourced, I would say I'm kind of an outsourced chief people officer. So I work with small and medium-sized organizations, and I'm brought in by CEOs and executive teams that may not have HR in-house to help them address people issues in organizations. Sometimes they have tactical HR people, and I work alongside them to help them with HR projects too. So I do a little bit of consulting and I do a little bit of practitioner work. So it's kind of a blend of both. I've been at this management consulting space for over 25 years. I worked at McKinsey. I see one of my fellow CBAers, Kawan, is on the call here. She and I worked together at Consumer Bankers a long time ago. I worked in an association education space. I've done a lot of work with on the consulting side. I've done work in the federal government space. So I started off really kind of in the leadership development world, association education, management consulting. In 2000, I started my consulting practice doing e-learning consulting, primarily to associations and nonprofits and small and medium-sized businesses. So I got into the e-learning game in the late 90s when that was really emerging. And then in the early 2000s, we really shifted the business into the human capital space when the federal government was really starting to create chief human capital officer roles in the federal government. And we helped stand up two different federal consulting practices for two different consulting companies doing federal consulting in the human capital space, and helped a lot of government agencies set up those offices within the federal government arena. And then, kind of then stepped back out to do a lot of diverse work across a lot of different types of clients. So we've done everything from work in agriculture to tech, aerospace, banking, like medical practices, like all kinds of different industries. So it's been a really, really interesting world. Back in the late summer, we spend a lot of time every single year going through all of the workplace studies that come out from ADP, Gallup, Deloitte, McKinsey, all of the big firms every year in the fall tend to come out with, in the early spring, start launching all of these different surveys on the workplace. And it's usually global workplace and then US-based workplace studies. And we started going through all the data again, and what usually is about 2,000 to 3,000 pages worth of data turned into about 8,000 to 9,000 pages of stuff. And we kind of joked that the big consulting firm consultants must have gotten really bored during COVID because the data was just outstanding, the volume of it. And so we really started saying, look, there's something really here when you look at this, and there's a lot of trends that are really new that are emerging from COVID, and we really need to start paying a lot of attention to that. So we really then figured out, we need to start crafting some things for small and medium-sized companies that can't afford to hire the Deloittes and the McKinseys and the Bain consulting companies, and really start crafting some things for smaller organizations. And so that's really what we've been focused on over the last 10 or so months. So I want to share with you today some of that information and that data, and also some of our consulting advice around that. And then I want to also open up some dialogue to see what you guys are seeing right now too, because I think that part's really important. So that's where we're going to head. That's where we're going to go. I don't know if anybody has any early questions on that stuff. And if you do, you can just pop it into the chat and we'll grab it. But I'm going to dive in here now a little bit of the data and share with you a little bit about what happened during COVID and the data that we have to look at, because that's going to really help paint the picture about what's happening now, and then what's going to be happening, what we foresee happening kind of in the future. So that's where we're headed. So the first thing I want to share with you, this is some of the Gallup data that we found to be the case for basically this was the 2020 engagement data. So this would be the data during COVID that happened. And it's pretty amazing because this is really the first time that we actually saw the global employee engagement numbers decrease in the Gallup survey. And that's usually a really interesting indicator that things are not going well. But you'll see that obviously during COVID, and we all know this to be the case, right? That 50% of the people during COVID received less money than usual. And if we focus really on the North America numbers, a third of people in North America started getting paid less money than normal. 49% of people, 40% of people worked fewer hours, 38% temporarily stopped working, 13% lost their business. Global engagement numbers went down 20%. In North America, this was down 2%. So these are really interesting numbers to be watching. And they were things that were, really kind of big aha moments. We all kind of knew this, but this was really the first time when this data came out was the first time that we'd actually seen numbers attached to the impact of COVID. So this, of course, came out a couple of years ago. SHRM came out at the end of last year with a really interesting study that took a look at the remote equity issues with regards to gender in the workplace too. And I thought this was also a really interesting piece of data to take a look at the male and female issues with regards to how working remotely kind of impacted things. And I think this was interesting also because we're seeing this play out now in the number of women specifically that are choosing not to return to the workplace. And so when we look at this data too, I found that the whole issue around that in this case, the men here, and I'm going to move this over just a second here. The men were working, I think they'd indicated they're working 13% fewer hours than women, which was interesting. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. That men found that they're about 35% more productive working remotely, and women were 40% more productive working remotely. There were lots of interesting issues around age ranges and years of experience, with women who were had 11 to 15 years of experience being 46% more productive working at home, which was pretty interesting too. But if you take a look at issues around women having difficulties forming strong working relationships, 23% of women said they had difficulty with that versus only 18% of men. So there was issues around, with that remote, with having only remote access to peers and colleagues, there was more difficulty forming those strong relationships, which makes sense. There's also issues around, around race and lack of opportunity for perceived raises for women. And so this is an area that I want to continue watching. And it's one of the areas as we're looking at compensation, that we're making sure that, especially with our clients, making sure that as compensation is being considered each year, that we're paying really close attention, that these groups of employees are not being disproportionately, their raises are lacking disproportionately because of that. And so I think that's a big thing to consider. And there's also this issue around fewer networking opportunities for women, and in this case, Asian American women, feeling like there's disproportionately fewer networking opportunities. So really making sure that we're creating those kind of opportunities, especially as organizations are coming back into a more hybrid environment, making sure that those networking opportunities are being equally and more, I would say more opportunities are being created for all people in the organization, but really paying close attention to women in particular. So I don't know, I found this is a really great data point. When I look at this stuff, I find them interesting. I don't ever use them as like big flashlights on anything, but really more just as a way to kind of illuminate a guiding path to pay attention to as we're moving forward. And we're looking at creating new policies and procedures and new programs in the workplace to kind of pay attention to these might be concerns moving forward. It was a great data point for last year. And so it gives us some interesting information as we're moving forward. The next thing I want to chat about is And this one was, I think, really fascinating. As people were working from home, I think a lot of people sat around the kitchen table and had a lot of conversations about whether or not what they were doing was really what they wanted to be doing long term. Did they want to continue working in the place they were working for the people they were working for, working in the industry that they were working in? Do they want to keep working, in the geographic location that they're at? Do they want to move? Do they want to go have their kids going to the same schools that they're going to? Do they want to start another business? All these things, I think, are conversations that people had. Do they want to retire? And we saw this happen over and over and over again. And I think these were much bigger conversations that most Americans had in this country. And I think the biggest one was we saw a huge shift in domestic population and a huge migration out of these 4 areas in particular. So DC saw a huge shift in population out of the city. We saw people moving out of California, New York, and Illinois in huge, huge numbers. We saw them moving to Idaho, Utah, Montana, Arizona. Texas and Florida are right behind these locations. So we saw huge moving and population increases in those areas. We saw the home sales last year booming. So if people right after kind of the tail end of the lockdowns of COVID, people really started selling homes last summer. April, May, and June last year, home sales were through the roof. And so a lot of people cashed out and moved. I'll tell you a really interesting, funny, and kind of interesting story. So on 95 South heading down to Richmond, there's an Airstream, the like Mid-Atlantic Airstream store is down there, whatever you want to call it, RV location is down there. And I'd stopped in there because I find them fascinating. And I was talking to the guys and they're like, we have like a 6-month backlog on most of our RVs, including Airstream right now. And I'm like, why is that? And they're like, well, people sold their houses, bought an RV, and literally are now just being nomads and traveling all over the country now that they can, and are traveling the country, loading up with Wi-Fi and working remotely. And this has kind of been, kind of people's MO from, most of last summer and over the winter time. So there was a lot of that happening. I think a lot of it was because of this. So there's a big transition of people moving around the country. In addition, a lot of people were quitting their jobs. So we're still at, by the way, this is a number that I used from last year, but we're still at about 4 million Americans a month quitting jobs. We float between about 3.8 and 4.2 million Americans quitting every month. So it's a pretty huge number. And even last year, we had about 50.3% of US adults in 2021 that resigned. So, and just retired. So this is really huge. Yeah, and PJ is asking, are we seeing significant turnover? Yeah, that's a great question for everybody, right? Are people still seeing turnover, and what percentage are you guys seeing right now? I would be really curious to know kind of where you guys are seeing that right now. Yeah, and this is, by the way, a number that I think is really low, and I'm still trying to dig up really good numbers on this. Yeah, Michelle, I see. Yeah, the turnovers are numbers. I think you're going to still see the turnover numbers. And I want to talk about this a little bit more, a little bit later in this too, but I think you're going to start seeing turnover numbers still really high, probably through this year. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But going back to this issue really quickly, starting a business or a side gig, I think this number is incredibly low. And I think one of the reasons, and I'm going to give you a hypothesis, and I would love you guys to pop in on this one too in the chat. I actually think that one of the reasons why we're seeing really low numbers of people working at restaurants and bars and retail and a lot of these places is a lot of these people during COVID, I think, upskilled themselves. I think they went on to YouTube and all of these Udemy and all of these online places, learned skills that they wanted to get, they wanted to learn. They had time during COVID to do it. I think they went online, they learned these skills, and they started selling those skills on places like Fiverr and Upwork and other places, started building up their portfolio. And when the job market started back up, they had enough skills then to go and join in kind of entry-level positions. And are starting to take up some of the entry-level positions in businesses and in fields that they wanted. So I think that's why we're really missing some of these kind of service industry kind of positions now. And I would love your guys' take on this. So I actually think this whole starting a side business or a side gig thing, these numbers are going to be people that actually started businesses and registered them as a business, but it doesn't include people that started like 1099 side gigs. So
Amy, definitely
yeah.
people are certainly agreeing with that, seeing that in the chat. Lisa had an interesting question about whether you've got data on people reshuffling as opposed to those that are resigning.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have never seen more new job, congratulations on your new job stuff in LinkedIn right now. I mean, I don't know. I mean, every day I think I see probably I would say fairly, probably at least five people saying, congratulations on your new job in LinkedIn. So, and I don't know if that's a new feature or a thing that popped in and now I'm just seeing them more, but I'm just seeing a ton of new people, even just kind of reshuffling around. I'm seeing a lot of that too. But I think there are a lot of people that have started side gigs. I think people started new businesses. I think people started, that were in service businesses, frankly, just learn new skills and have just completely left whatever service industry they were in just to make money now to get into their passion job and really start doing things they really wanted to do. So. Yeah, Michelle, I agree with you. People that are having multiple jobs because people want multiple sources of revenue. I think that is going to be also another thing that we're going to start seeing more and more employees having side gigs, especially with the economy the way it is, and people feeling like they need to have multiple sources of revenue coming in to kind of hedge their bets on things and also just to make ends meet. So I would not be surprised. And if you have in your employee handbook that people can't keep, aren't allowed to have, secondary jobs, I've seen that in a couple of handbooks from time to time. You may want to rethink that because I think you're going to find more and more employees that are going to want that. So, this is a good time for us to ask any questions. Anybody have any other questions at this point? Feel free to unmute yourself too if you want to ask a question. Kind of all of this has really left employees kind of at this kind of point, which is kind of at the end of COVID, people are really feeling like there's kind of this lack of fairness and trust and consistency and transparency and, honesty and authenticity around all of the things that happened in COVID. And that's kind of where we left things kind of in the middle of last year with employees. And it's crazy. It's just been a really crazy experience for a lot of employees. And this is the problem that we're experiencing right now. And I don't want to keep going if people have questions. So definitely please feel free to jump in if you've got one.
Well, I attended a summit yesterday, and regarding the what you're talking about, the fairness, the trust, the consistency, how it changed the dynamics in the office, and you have these companies who are let's go into the office, trying to, is it because due to the performance of the company, or is it because the boss ego? Why do you want them in the office, right? And then you have the hybrid mindset where you have these leaders who have not really navigated through the communication piece on how to be consistent and equitable or equal, so you have like the out group, the in group. So you're going to have meetings in a conference room, and you're going to have meetings in a Zoom, room. So there's been lots of like this miscommunication and this just some poor manners in which some leaders have not been able to really capture that and make it a smooth transition to it to be an equal opportunity department, company, group, whatever. I hope I'm making sense when I'm saying that.
You absolutely do.
The fairness, the consistency, the transparency is coming from, what communication and how you communicate with your employees as a leader, right?
Yep.
So,
You're absolutely spot on. And I'm actually going to show you some interesting data coming up about that exact same thing, because that's a huge part of it. So you've absolutely hit the nail on the head on that. And it's a really sticky issue that people are struggling with right now. So Letitia, I'm just reading your comment here about you have military employees and some on deployments. Yeah, and military employees and military families. I get that too. I worked with a dermatology practice and really encouraged them to hire military spouses to work in there, because a lot of them were medical assistants. And yeah, I get that. So when the spouse goes on deployment, then, and it's usually moms, but not always, that have to go home and take care of the kids. And I get that it's really tough, and you got to have multiple incomes. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. And Renee, I agree with you too. Like there's a lot of social stuff that kind of played into all of during the COVID times. There were a lot of social issues that happened too, that have really impacted things. Yeah, it was kind of a real kind of, lots of different things kind of all coming together at once during this, that have really built up this whole issue of why people are really dissatisfied generally with the workplace. And I'll tell you what this has really done. It has really, really shifted the mindset of employees across the board, almost completely. And it's literally turned things completely on its head, both from a leadership perspective and from an employee mindset perspective too. So I want to see if we can break off into groups for just about 10 minutes. And I'm going to have you guys just focus really in on one key question, which is, what do you see as the biggest kind of leadership challenge right now? And I want you to think longer term. So not so much in terms of, because here in the Roundtable, we spend a lot of time talking about recruitment and returning to the office. So not so much about those two issues, but really kind of longer term than that. What do you see as the biggest leadership challenge moving forward? So let's say end of the year next year. And if you guys as a group can kind of identify one big one, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes or so. So it's, so it's 10:30 right now. So we'll come back at 10:40 and see if you guys can identify one big group. And then we'll come back. And if you can identify a brave leader that wants to debrief it and pop into, off of on the mic and do that, that'd be great. Or you can put it into chat. Either way. We're going to spend about just about 10 minutes. We'll be in groups of about 4. So I'll give everybody kind of a chance to really noodle that question. So what do you see as your biggest leadership challenge? We've got about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll chat more about that.
Everybody should have received an invite to your breakout room. And start recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
Awesome. So I would love to hear what you guys had to say about this. Anybody have some good topics on what you see as your biggest leadership challenge? And I know this group likes to share.
I don't mind speaking for the group that I was part of. We found that all of us were suffering from, or our leaders were suffering from the same thing. And it seems almost like an analysis paralysis. We're going to wait to see what happens before we make a decision. In the meantime, you have employees who are telling you a number of things. Number one, it pains me that I have to get on public transportation to get into the office, only to open up my computer and get back onto Teams. I have other organizations that are courting me that, and these are things that I've heard, not my own situation, but I have other organizations that are courting me and are willing to pay me more money, and they don't have an office. I'd be working from home full time, which means I can cook dinner at night, and I can be there with my kids when they get off the bus. And another situation where we have remote employees who, because of their location, do not have to meet the requirement of being in the office 2 days a week. And how is it fair for them just because they're in that location as a matter of convenience, not because the business has sent them there? How is that convenient? How is that fair to me, where you're still requiring me, because I am in the DMV area, to come into the office? So, and then posing these to senior leadership, they seem to want to kick the can down the road. Okay, yes, we've heard this. We'll make a decision. And one person in our group said, we're gonna die before this decision is made, and it's really very telling. So.
Yep. Yeah, and that point, you guys have hit the nail on the head. I think Nancy was kind of alluding to this too, or a little bit, or some of that a little bit earlier too. This is the consummate problem right now. Like the wait to make decisions, the waiting game. Employees are really over that, and that's a really big problem. A lot of this again is kind of symptomatic of the issues that are happening right now, and I get it. It's a really big problem. Anybody see anything kind of down the road, even farther than just kind of the current hiring issues or the
Yeah, I'm Krista.
Yeah.
One of the things that we brought up also in our group was down the road is if there is going to be this constant turnover or working from anywhere, side hustles, the way you were describing it, is that this knowledge management and knowledge transfer, that we're already starting to feel this loss of institutional knowledge. So it could be like a business continuity issue. That how are you, if you're constantly reshuffling, then how do you manage all this knowledge sharing? And that plays into performance and coaching, et cetera. So I feel like knowledge management, even in the hybrid world, let alone just the turnover, but in the hybrid environment is a challenge we're grappling with now. And I can just see it getting more difficult.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do too with like team dynamics and how teams are formed. I think that for me is a future, a big future of work thing too, is team design, and how teams are creating knowledge assets and how they're sharing knowledge and information, so that if one person leaves, the team has the knowledge versus it being sitting with one individual. So yeah, that's a huge topic.
And Amy, if I must,
yeah.
So in our group, we did, of course, touch base on the sustainability and the, making sure that the communication is, fluid across the way when we're doing this hybrid remote work, and how as a company, how do we keep up with other companies and the standards, right? And that goes hand in hand with what you were just saying, and the gentleman that was just on about, the communication and the institutionalized knowledge. I mean, that it's key on how communication is handled moving forward. I mean, communication from the bottom up.
Yep.
How are we going to do that? That's going to be very interesting. And again, to keep up with the competitiveness of other companies and the standards, to set the standard, to be an employer of choice.
Yep.
Our group thought further down the road and stating, and I was with Lisa and Renee, we were thinking about skill building, career pathways. How are we building careers so that those that are entry level with us or middle level independent contributors, that they stay with us long enough to become the leadership of the future, that they bring all those things forward. We are all in the midst of discovering, whether we're consulting or physical therapy or I'm in consumer products, how do we get that independent contributor group, that top talent, whatever terminology you want to use, to stay? And they are asking us, what does my career look like? What is my pathway? How are you going to develop me, train me, give me the experiences, that 70-20-10, in order to say that I'm prepared to be your leadership group in the future? So we all shared that. We were surprised that, we weren't in the same industry, but we were all discovering the same challenges.
Yeah. Love that, Justina. That's really key. And that is a real future thing, right? That's a real future topic that you've got to start talking about now. That's great. I love it. Yep. Marianne, you wanted to add something too?
Yeah, we were talking in our group. It was interesting. All of us felt like our senior leadership had major capacity issues in terms of workload and the ability, and we had been wanting to do some succession planning work and development work and have been, but there's some resistance because of how absolutely busy for people have been and at a breaking point. At least that's what I'm seeing. So developing the next generation and succession planning is a big, at least some of our organizations, we see retirements coming. And so making that a priority, but then we're also at the other side of things, some of the more junior level employees that have been hired during the pandemic that have, not really spent a lot of time in a work environment. At least with my organization, I've already lost one, didn't connect with the culture. And how are we able to develop people without having our eyes on them, and having that stickiness and connection to the organization?
Yeah. If I was to pick kind of one thing right now, if I could wave a magic wand and like say, I can fix one thing right now, it would be giving everybody some extra elbow room, like everybody in HR, all the executives, all of our employees, like giving everybody just some extra space to breathe right now and just take like a big extra like load off of people's shoulders. I feel like everybody feels like super compressed.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was a way for us to be able to just loosen that up a little bit and just give people that extra little space to just take an extra big breath and just take a step back. It's kind of like if we could just like go on a global retreat for like a week and just give everybody the time, global vacation, like truly for like a week, and just give everybody that space just to go and just, I don't know, reconnect with nature or yourself or whatever you need to do just to have some downtime. I think people need it right now because it's like, wow, we got to like unwind some stuff. So you guys, this was really great feedback and really great information. Thanks for having that conversation. I think that there's a lot of, there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle that really have to get kind of unwound, and a lot of really good things coming down the pike as far as what people need to really focus on. I want to jump into some of this leadership stuff and kind of take this to the next piece. We talked, we have another poll here really quickly that we're going to pop in here, which is talking a little bit more about the leadership aspect, which is how comfortable are you providing frank feedback to your CEO and senior leaders in your organization? So I'm going to have you answer that one real quick. And there's a secondary one right after that. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you sit on that one? And we're going to ask them the flip of this question in a second, which is going to be really interesting. So it looks like you guys, and PJ, can they see the answers as this is going on?
No, they'll be able to see it in just a second.
Okay.
We've got about 89%. So let me go ahead and end the poll, and I'm going to share the results so they can see the results now.
Okay, great. So yeah, so you guys are really comfortable generally. So 4s, 3s, 4s, 5s in doing this. Okay, so now we're going to do the next poll, which is just the flip of this, which is, how comfortable do you think, or how well do you think your CEO and senior leaders are in receiving that feedback? So yeah, this is always interesting to ask these two questions back to back, because I know you guys are usually pretty good about being able to give the frank feedback, but it's kind of in the middle. Let's see, as we're getting there.
All right, let me go ahead. Give it just another second, and I will end the poll and sharing the results with everybody now.
Okay. So a little more in the middle on this one, right? So kind of interesting how this kind of plays out, right? So we're comfortable giving the feedback, but it's kind of a little bit more in the middle of the road about whether or not we think people are okay with receiving the feedback. This is, these are kind of typical in the results I see, which is really good. I mean, we're generally pretty good about giving the feedback from a kind of an HR management leadership perspective, but not necessarily so good about their leadership teams are not necessarily great about receiving it, which is fascinating. Yeah, and they'll listen. It's a bigger challenge having them act on it. Yep, that's a big part of it too. Totally get that. So here's kind of the key part of it. So I want to share with you a couple of interesting leadership things. So I found this on Instagram later in March, right after it was posted, which is, the Goldman Sachs CEO demanded that all employees return full-time to the office, and only half showed up. I thought that was pretty fascinating, considering, I would think, okay, well, Goldman Sachs You'd think he'd be able to get them to jump right in, but in fact, no. And then just recently, I was looking at some culture data, and in fact, super interesting because Goldman Sachs on this Culture 500 company thing on financial services, you know, they are one of the higher attrition companies when it comes to culture, right? So you've got a CEO that makes a mandate about coming back to the office, yet they have, you know, huge attrition numbers. And I see this an awful lot in companies where, you know, it's really hard to get people to kind of do as I say when you've got real culture issues happening and high attrition and other kinds of things. So this next, you know, a couple of you all were talking about this earlier, which I think is really interesting because I've been seeing this real mismatch in where leaders and where employees are. And we've talked about this already a couple of times, right? Where leaders are kind of doing this thing where they're not talking, they're taking forever and a day to make decisions, and employees and leaders are kind of at this total mismatch in where they are at right now. And so there was a study done at the very end of last year, and it was reported at the beginning of this year that Slack did of knowledge workers. And it was fascinating to actually finally have the data that supported what I was seeing. And so there's this whole mismatch between, you know, today's leaders are leading kind of with this industrial age leadership mentality, whereas today's employees are in this whole, you're not the boss of me mentality. And I would love you guys, as we're going through this, to kind of give me your feedback on this. Right. So today's leaders have this kind of still are in this hierarchy mentality, whereas today's employees are now kind of really looking at things in more of a relationship way. Right. And there we go. So, you know, leaders are kind of wanting people to be back in the office, and they have still this kind of live to work mentality, be in the office thing, whereas employees are wanting to be more flexible, or have shifted definitely more to this work to live, work wherever, whenever mentality. The leaders are kind of into this whole commitment piece, which is the do as I say, follow me, respect me kind of thing. Whereas, you know, our employees are still committed, but it looks different. It's, you know, if a leader says, do as I say, they're like, no, I don't have to do what you say, I'll just quit. Or, you know, the leader says, follow me, and they're like, no, I don't really like you. Or respect me on one hand is like, no, I really don't have to. There's this very much an independent kind of mindset that's happening now with employees and leaders. And it's really, really fascinating to me.
Is that the culture, the collectiveness culture, HR culture, versus like the more the autonomy, excuse me. So like the more hierarchy, which is like the collectiveness, and then the autonomy. I think that's what's going on right now. It's like a battle.
Yeah, I think it kind of is a battle right now, for sure. I think it definitely is. And, you know, I definitely agree. And from a data perspective, you know, we're seeing those big disconnects. So we've got, you know, about 44% of executives wanting employees back in the office full time, whereas we've got 76% of non-executives and knowledge workers wanting flexibility of where and when they work. You know, if you add in, you know, responses from executives about being in the office some of the time and full time, that number increases to 66%. You know, whereas employees, you know, from the survey, 93% wanted flexibility about when they work. So there's lots of real big, you know, complete mismatches here again about the when and where and how people are working. And this bottom box is really kind of where I think a lot of it's at, right? So employees, the perception factor is the one that we've got to be paying attention to. And this is the message, I think, from an HR perspective, is sharing the perception factor with executives and leaders, which is that, you know, executives are content, right? They have better homes, they have better offices, they have better pay, they have 62% more job satisfaction than employees, and executives are content with their work. They are a focus group of one, in the sense that 66% of execs are crafting future plans without direct input from employees. That's happening a lot of places. And I think this goes to what we were talking, I think Brian was talking about this earlier, right? Where they're thinking about things and policies and procedures and how they want to come back to the office and all this other kind of stuff, but they're not necessarily getting in the weeds with employees to really figure out what employees need on a local level and really using that data. That doesn't mean that you guys aren't doing surveys necessarily, but it's not, a lot of executives really aren't getting in the weeds with employees. Some groups are, but not across the board. And finally, this whole issue of that transparency piece, right? Again, you hit the nail on the head with that one, right? The transparency piece, which is, less than 50% of employees feel the bosses are being transparent about future plans. Right? That's huge. And all of these things are leading to employees basically saying, you know what, I don't have skin in the game. You don't have skin in the game with me. Therefore, I'm not going to have skin in the game with you. So, you're not going to be connected with me. I'm not going to be connected with you. And I think that's really where this whole disconnect comes from. Yeah. So. Yeah. So Tiffany, your point is really great. So fortunately, I'm glad you've got leaders that get it. That's really important. Really, really important. So it looks like I have done some sort of nice green ink on the screen, which I did not mean to do this, but that's okay. So bottom line is, bosses no longer have the upper hand in organizations. So how will you build trust, collaboration, and transparency moving forward? And that's really kind of the key question in this whole entire thing is how are we really going to get that done and get that dealt with? The new Gallup data just came out on employee engagement. This is another huge trend. And very unfortunately, we're seeing for 2022 that both the engaged numbers are down to 32% and the actively disengaged numbers are up to 17%. So the more those two numbers start coming together, the crazier things are going to get. But this is the closest those numbers have been in quite some time. So these are some numbers that we're really going to have to focus on. And I'll tell you, employee engagement, by the way, I'm going to give a little hint away here in just a second, but that is one of the biggest things that we're really focused on right now is employee engagement. So here we go on to the next one really fast, because I know I'm kind of trying to keep track of time here. So I want to keep track here of the 3 keys and 3 reasons why employees are quitting without another job in hand. This is a key one. This came from a recent McKinsey study. I think we talked about this a little bit at one of the HR Roundtable meetings, but the top reasons why people are quitting without another job in hand, right? So they're just quitting. They're done. They've checked out, tapped out, I'm finished. Uncaring leaders and managers was the first. Second was unstable work performance expectations, lack of career development and advancement potential. And Julie, yes, well, I'm going to share a version of this with you guys for sure. So this will go out with the debrief of the wrap up. 4 is lack of meaningful work, and 5 is lack of support for employee health and well-being. So instead of just 3, I gave you the top 5 from that survey. So these are really key important things. And I don't know what to say about this as far as I don't know really that I've ever really seen in the last 10 years, people just up and quitting in the numbers that we've seen right now. But a lot of it is, that first slide that I showed you that had the boxes in it with people selling their homes and moving and all the other kind of stuff. People had the financial means in a lot of cases to do that kind of at the end of last year. I don't know if that would be the case as much now as it was then, because just because of the economics of things at this point. But, I don't know, have any of you guys seen any more people kind of just quitting without another job in hand recently? I'd be super curious if you guys are seeing that. And just kind of, I'm going to keep an eye on time here. I'm going to kind of skip through this next one really quickly and kind of move along here, but because I know I owe you guys a few more pieces of this puzzle, but definitely chime in here because I would love to keep this going. So yeah, a couple of early retirements. Yeah. I'm seeing that too. All right, so I want to focus here on some real future stuff. So all of the pieces of the puzzle that we've talked about so far have all painted this picture. And my big thing now is, what do we do moving forward? Right? How do we get things moving forward so that we get our leadership team kind of rethinking what they're doing and getting the ball going in a really positive direction? How do we kind of fix the issues from the COVID era and get into this post-COVID workplace? And we've created a leadership challenge. And these 8 skills and steps that I'm sharing with you now are really the 8 steps in our leadership challenge that we've created. And the reason why we've created these specific 8 is really because if you get these 8 steps right, you're going to start creating a really strong foundation in your organization moving forward. And the first 4 steps are all focused on the individual leader, because I really feel pretty strongly right now that leaders have got to get themselves squared away first. And so I would love your guys' feedback on this in the chat as we're going through this, and tell me what you think. So number 1 is getting really clear about your own leadership values. I think a lot of leaders could sit here and say, yeah, I've got values, but they haven't really taken a lot of time to really clearly articulate what they are and use that as the anchor as they're moving forward. And I think if more of us and more leaders in general spend some time really crafting what those values really are for them, it helps that you, as you're moving forward, especially in a culture and an environment where there might be a lot more uncertainty in the future, it will really help you respond quicker, faster, and more efficiently if you have those clearly articulated. It's also going to help you as you're leading teams, and that's coming up here in a minute. But I think this is really key. So getting really clear about your own leadership values, defining them and using them as your compass to navigate yourself forward is key. The second one is very clearly thinking about and defining your own post-pandemic work mindset. So what were you thinking about work before the pandemic? How were you working before the pandemic? And now how are you working after the pandemic? What has shifted and what do you value? Do you value work, being more committed to working, more kind of 9 to 5, taking a clear break in the middle of the day, making sure that you're taking the weekends off, not sending emails after hours? Are you more committed to having more downtime, more time to unplug, not pinging your team with ideas, outside of the work environment? Are you wanting more flexibility? Are you wanting more time to work from home? What does it look like for you as a leader first and foremost, right? And crafting that and being very clearly articulating that. And then thirdly, after you've gotten really clear about that, what issues do you foresee that creating for you? What speed bumps are in the way that you need to identify? And then roadblocks are things that you actually can't move. There are things that are going to get in your way that you can't really adjust or fix, but just identifying what those look like for you. And then coming up with what kind of leadership goals you need to have over the next 90 days. What skills do you need as a leader to develop or change or shift? Or what pieces of information do you need to grow as a leader over the next 90 days? So that's all kind of 1 to 4 is kind of all really focusing on a leader and what they need to really move themselves forward in this new post-pandemic environment. And then it's really about working then with your team and discussing their post-pandemic mindset and expectations. You guys, number 5, this is key for every single leader in an organization right now. You all should be sitting down with your teams and having this conversation. Hey, this is how we worked with our team before the pandemic, but how do we want to show up now for each other post-pandemic? What does it look like for each of us? And then also having the values conversation post-pandemic. What is the set of shared values that our team has going forward? How, what do we all value individually? And then what do we value collectively as a team? If you get 5 and 6 nailed down really well, then your team then has a nice blueprint and kind of rules of engagement for how you all want to operate. I will tell you, if organizations did this on the individual and then the team level, it will solve all of your return to work problems, because every team will then have a nice framework for how they will engage with work. And it will keep employees happy and satisfied at the team level. And organizations won't have to spend the time coming up with one policy for the entire organization. The teams will be able to better self-manage. And that's what employees want. So what are your thoughts on that concept right there? And I have to stop because this is the longest I've talked in a long time. So. Anyone? It's awfully quiet. Did I lose you guys? We good?
No, we're still here.
Okay.
I would say that, I really appreciate this idea of revisiting values and the way that you work. I think it's so easy to say, okay, because of the pandemic, we had to shift operations and our, team style this way. And then you just adopt it without really thinking, okay, is this really the best and most productive way to move forward? So, I really completely agree with just those being some key drivers of saying, hey, it's all about revisiting and reestablishing, values and the way that we work to make sure that that is going to be the most fruitful way. So I love that.
Thanks for the feedback on that. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting that this whole future of work and the way we redesign things is going to be easy, but I'm telling you, there are some real fundamental shifts that are going to need to happen if people want to create, highly engaged organizations. And it's to be really honestly, the organizations that are seeing really high retention rates are doing things very similar to this now. And it's really important. It's really important to do. And Nancy, I totally agree. Listening and empathizing and responding with intent. I think that's really key. I think if your teams have these kind of conversations too, I think employees finally feel listened to. And I think that's a big part of this, which is they haven't felt listened to and they haven't felt like they've been engaged with in a really long time and at a really meaningful level. And so I think that's really key. So I think that's a really important piece. The 7th and 8th steps are really then 7 is kind of doing things like this, which is really understanding what's happening in the workplace in general right now, getting and gathering lots of good data and information. And then 8 is kind of really creating that leadership compass, which is taking all of that data in and creating for yourself your own leadership blueprint on how you want to move forward. So that's really kind of the 8 steps and really kind of getting things hammered out for leaders. And the first 6, I think, are absolutely critical in that process. But 7 and 8 are equally important because 7 is really understanding not only what's happening with you and your team, but what's happening in the broader space as a whole. And then 8 is actually coming up with a plan of action to actually move the ball forward in the future. And I think that is where a lot of people fall short. They'll do maybe steps, a couple of the first steps, and maybe work with their team a little bit, and maybe, from time to time gather some information, but they don't actually come up with an actual plan to how to take that forward. So this is kind of that whole culmination of all 8 steps together. And this is really, I think, where leaders need to be right now in order to really make big strides in their organization. So I think it's really, really important stuff. So I'm going to keep the lines open. So if you guys have questions, let me know, because I want to make sure that we're covering everything. But at the same time, I know a ton of information here too. So 2 key human capital areas to focus on in 2022, besides the usual suspects, really understanding people at a really deep level and getting a lot of good feedback and constant feedback from your employees. Those are the 2 key things. We recommend doing it through one of 2 different methods, one through personality assessments, and the other one through employee engagement surveys and management tools. So we use a couple of different ones. Our primary tool is a Kolbe assessment. Look, I don't care what tool you use, Clifton Strengths, Kolbe, there's a ton of them out there, right? Tons of them out there. There's one part of it, which is having people actually take the assessments. Now, a lot of organizations have done that. How many of you guys have actually, you can just show me hands too if you want, like how many of you guys actually do assessments internally in your organization? Anybody? Some people do. Yeah, thumbs up on that. Yeah, great. It's a whole nother thing to use those assessments and use the data within them to really use them as a management tool. A DISC is great. Yep. It's a whole nother thing to be able to, though, take that and then actually use it as a management tool. And that's the next step that most organizations don't get to. So I would really encourage you as HR leaders and really kind of moving into the human capital space is really kind of elevate that and start saying, look, it isn't just about getting people's numbers or people's results. How do we use that to evaluate team and team performance? How do we use that to develop leaders and future leaders? How do we use that to create career paths for people? How do we use that in our hiring process? How do we identify talent with those strengths? How do we create learning opportunities, understanding people's unique strengths? There are a lot of different ways and different tools to do these different things. And again, we use Colby, and I'm not selling it, but I'm just saying we use it very specifically because there's lots of different applications for it. And it gives us data, it uses qualitative and quantitative data. And I like that. But you've got to use whatever tools you've got to start using it as more of a management tool than just things. So yeah, use StrengthsFinder. That's great. So yeah, you have a spreadsheet of everybody's strengths. That's fantastic. And by the way, the Gallup StrengthsFinder stuff is fantastic. And there's a lot of different tools in the Gallup website that you can use with that too. So that's a really, really cool tool to use. The next one that we use, by the way, is an employee engagement tool. Again, it's not just about doing the survey itself, but it's about using the management tools behind it to be able to actually impact change. So, and I'll tell you in just a few minutes about an opportunity that you can use if you want to, but the tool that we use here is a survey tool, but it's also a management tool behind it. So the leadership team actually gets access to the anonymous data behind it, and they can actually break it down by teams and departments and all kinds and geographies and whatever else they want. And they can actually figure out kind of where the disengagement happens and then really work with those groups of people to help with re-engagement and whatnot. And that's really kind of the key on this, is really kind of helping to figure out what's going on and where the groups are and the teams are that are really struggling, and figuring out what we can do to help re-engage employees. So Hogan is great. Yep, Hogan is really good too. So again, keys on both of these. Doesn't matter what tools you use. It's not just about getting the data and getting the surveys and sending out the assessments and that kind of stuff. It's about how you're using the data on the back end to help lead organizations moving forward. So that's really kind of the future piece that I really want people focused on now, is not just gathering the data, but figuring out kind of what to do with it moving forward. Okay. And some quick ones here, kind of what the future is showing us. So small and mid-sized organizations really need to look at customizing their employee experience to stay competitive. Needing to have much more to, employees need to have much more to say about how they're going to engage in their work and work experiences overall. This one is really important, and I'll explain to you what these acronyms are. Focus on what gets done, or the outcomes-based work, not how and where the work gets done, and using measures and metrics. So OKRs is objectives and key results, or KPIs are key performance indicators. These are just two different types of goal metrics that you can set up, and using shorter term goals. This stuff is really important. Reimagining new leadership skill sets that are needed based on team types. So the short version of this is, we've really identified 3 different types of teams that people can lead. You can lead independent teams where everybody works independently and whatnot. So leadership skills really depend on the different types of teams you're leading. Coming into the office requires a workplace value proposition. So you've got to tell people why it is, what the value proposition is for that, as well as, why working for your organization and staying there. And frankly, that human capital management is going to take on a whole new meaning moving forward. So there's going to be much higher level, chief people officer roles that people are going to need to take in even small and medium-sized organizations as we move forward. So, all right, so we're done. We're wrapping up. I want to get some feedback from you guys, have some more discussion here. I know it's been a long 90 minutes. as we move forward. And I do not know where my squiggly green came from, but I hope it is there and I cannot get rid of it. So I'll figure that out later. But any thoughts? I know we're going to do another poll question, but I think we're going to skip that for now. I would love your guys' take on this. What do you think?
Amy, I do have a question. If
Sure.
someone was thinking about how to best go about implementing a lot of these things, how would they go about doing that? Kind of where do you start in that process? And I know Brian had asked the question earlier about, you know, what if you're not getting buy-in from leadership on this? And, you know, just kind of, I guess, how best to position yourself from an HR perspective.
Yeah. So where to get started? I think you can kind of hit things up from two different perspectives, right? One is the data perspective. If having conversations with your leadership isn't doing it, then getting data and sharing the data and the information with your leadership team may help, because data tends to help more analytical minds kind of see what's actually happening. But if that's not helping either, you know, I guess part of the question is really kind of asking the 5 whys, like figuring out like what the real issues are to get your leadership to shift. Like if they're just not going to shift at all, then what you're going to start seeing is you're going to start seeing pain points happening, like turnover, right? If your organization's already seeing really big turnover, then I would start assigning dollars to that and start explaining the cost of it. Like, what is it really costing your organization in turnover? And why are we having turnover? And really getting to the whys behind that. And then, you know, and just keeping that really, you know, by the numbers. And I found that over time, when the pain point gets big enough, people will change. So if they're not making the change now, that means the pain isn't big enough. That's the reality of it. Nobody's going to make changes because they want to make change, because that only few people will do that. So, you know, if they're not making the change, then the pain isn't big enough for them. So they've got to understand what the pain is to the organization. And if bottom line numbers are it, then that's a thing. If you don't know how to calculate, by the way, turnover costs, there's a lot of interesting metrics on that online, but I'm always happy to sit down with anybody, by the way, and help you guys figure that out. So, and I don't charge for that. So if you want to just, especially if you're part of the roundtable, like I have no problem, like you pick up the phone, chat, email me, let's set up a time, we'll talk, and I'll help you figure out how to ballpark that, because those numbers are pretty astounding, especially nowadays, because recruiting costs are so significant. The cost has really gone up. And so if you need help kind of calculating, you know, how do I determine what the turnover cost is for an employee? You know, I'll help you sit down and figure that out and come up with a metric for that, because those are a pretty big deal. And that's kind of a thing. I mean, if it's, there's a million different symptoms to organizational turnover, right? It could be culture. It could be a team leadership. Most of the time when people quit, they quit because of their supervisor. That's the first place I usually look. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. That's what the data shows. That's what the surveys show. That's usually the issue. So that's usually the big piece of this. So that's usually where I start.
Thank you, Amy. This was really, really informative.
Hey, Shelley, sure.
And really insightful. And I agree with you completely. That's why people quit, because of their supervisor most of the time.
Yeah, I would take a look
They're
at
not going to say
team.
it. They're not going to say it directly, but they'll just say, "Oh, I've got a better opportunity."
Yeah, I would take a look at numbers. By the way, I wasn't really initially a real data person until I started realizing the data doesn't really lie when you start looking at it. And that's one of the reasons why our tagline is data-driven, compassionate candor. Data-driven on the human capital side means, what is the data telling us? I mean, when you start looking at turnover by department and you start seeing 1 or 2 departments with really high turnover numbers, I'm telling you, that's the supervisor. You can argue with me. I don't even have to know you. I'll tell you right now, I'll tell you, and I'll put $100 down right now on the table. It's the supervisor of that department. 100% of the time. It is. So, you know, or a poisonous employee in that department, but it is one or the other usually. But that's a thing. So, I mean, there's always symptoms. These things are all symptoms of bigger problems, and you have to dig down and start asking the why questions. Well, why is that? Well, why is that? Why is that? And really dig in and you'll find it. So, yeah, it's really, really good questions. I did want to just offer you guys a couple of things really quickly. We have a couple of freebies and cool resources for you guys that we just have generally. We have, besides our consulting work that we normally do and our speaking gigs that we do, we have our leadership challenge, which we just launched. It's a self-paced program. The 8 steps that I talked about earlier, it's the 8 steps, but we walk you through it. We charge $149, which is kind of crazy, but that's what we're charging for it right now. There's a great workbook that goes with it. It's a self-paced program, and it walks you through how to do those 8 steps. Maddock, my assistant, is here on here. He'll drop that in. We have a free leadership scorecard, totally free, has a guide that goes with it. I'm updating the guide constantly. So it's like it takes about 5 minutes to complete it. I update the guide periodically, so you never have to retake the scorecard after you do it once, but you can always get an updated guide if you want it. So you can always just rerun your guide. There he goes. He just dropped in the links for the scorecard. That's free. The challenge is $149. If you want to do that, that's great. And I'm actually getting ready to start our 6-week sprint. I'm going to offer that to the HR Roundtable folks for half price. If you're interested in doing that with me, that's a really great program too. It's 6 weeks. We're starting it on the 23rd. We're going to do about 8 to 12 people in it. It's more in depth than the challenge. So you get the challenge for free, by the way. Plus, we work through our future of work roadmap. You get the employee engagement survey tool that you saw earlier. You get to do the baseline for your organization with that, and I help you work through that. Plus a bunch of other kind of getting started in this whole future of work stuff. I kind of walk you through that. So it's 6 60-minute calls once a week for 6 weeks. It's a group call plus 3 one-on-one coaching sessions and some other great tools and whatnot. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the chat. Set up a call. We can chat more about it. I can answer your questions. And you can sign up if you want to. If not, that's great too. I just like to offer this to this group of people because you guys are awesome, and I love this group, and it's a great group of great professionals. And so I just wanted to throw that out there for what that is worth. And there's a little bit, I think there's a little bit more in there about, yeah, there's a little bit more about that too. So that's the breakdown of those 2 things. But the scorecard is, by the way, it's a really great free little scorecard too. So that's kind of gives you kind of a good sense of where you stand on a lot of things as well. So you've got the links, you got the stuff. You've got any more questions? That's kind of what we were. I think we're kind of.
Yeah, Amy, I had one question, and you may have answered it somewhat. So when you were engaging with the executives, and you said, you mentioned that, just expanding like the bandwidth of the HR professionals, just giving them more like space and things like that. What are some of the responses that you've gotten back from leadership when you've discussed the burnout and things like that?
Always discuss like the organizational burnout.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I think a lot of leaders understand that there's organizational burnout. I think that a lot of leaders right now they don't really understand the disconnect piece. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they don't understand the disconnect piece because they're so in it. They're so comfortable in their own situation. They don't exactly understand the disconnect piece. So the part where it was like the leader versus the employee slide that I was showing you, the side-by-side, like they don't get that really, which I find interesting. It's kind of like I'm explaining to you what your world is looking like through your employee's perspective, and you don't understand it. And they really have a hard time getting it. So you have to kind of find another way around. Like it's funny, like trying to find another door to get in. And a lot of it is with data. I mean, I'm finding a lot of success with the data pieces at the end of the day, because it's like, especially if we start talking about turnover, what turnover could look like. If organizations haven't been dealing with a lot of turnover, it's likely that they will, especially if they're going to mandate. Okay, so let me just tell you this. returning, the problems that you are or are not having with returning to the office are going to be symptomatic of what you're going to be experiencing longer term, right? So if you haven't come back to the office yet, you're not seeing it yet. You're not seeing the problems yet, okay? But if you've already come back to the office full time and you're not having any problems, that's great. So you may have other issues later on, right? So this isn't going to be your bigger issue. But remaining flexible in your work environment is going to be key. And the more you can customize things at a team level, if I can't get any point across other than this one, this is it. You have got to allow your teams to co-create their work environment that works best for them, which requires trust that they're going to do the right thing. You've left them to be on their own, to work remotely for the last 2 years. So we need to trust them to be able to come back together in a way that's going to be efficient and get work done. And then, so start with the base of trust that they're going to do that. And then when they don't, address that, right? I think what's starting to happen is we're starting back with a base of distrust. Like we can't trust them to come back together to work properly. And I think I think a lot of employees are sensing that, right? Why are you having us come back to the office 3 days a week? We've already been working 5 days a week remote and you've trusted us in that environment, right? That's the problem that we're having right now, right? So it's a trust issue. It's all those things. So I think really right now it's about leaders need to understand they've got to get out of their comfy spot and understand that the way things have been going has worked, and we've got to like retool our brains to let that happen. So I know we're butting right up on time here. Thank you guys so much for sticking this out for the whole 90 minutes. I appreciate it. I hope it was useful to you. I hope you found it valuable. If anybody just wants to talk and chat, I would totally encourage it. You can always go to our website. In the top right-hand corner, it says book a call. Just book a call. I don't charge for those. I'd love to chat with you guys about anything. Happy to help. Super excited about the stuff we've got coming up. And I'd love to see you guys next Thursday, 2 o'clock is the next roundtable meeting. I told PJ I would talk about that. They're really great. If you're new to the roundtable, it is a great group. So I definitely highly encourage you to come and join us.
Amy, thank you so much. Today's been amazing. Lots of fantastic information. Thank you so much. As I said, I'll make sure that I get the summary out to everybody. That'll include slides, also the recording as well. We really appreciate all of your time today, and certainly everybody who was able to take the time to join us. Thank you again. As always, make sure that you guys are taking care of yourselves as much as you're doing all of these great things for your organization and trying to find ways to help them and to help your staff and leadership. Make sure you're also taking care of yourselves. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and everybody have a great weekend. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.